All right. We are so excited to have a special guest on today, right, Bob? I
Oh my
mean,
gosh, yeah.
I don't even know how to keep the intro to Dirk Friel very short because I feel like the number of hats Dirk wears is so many. But many of our listeners may know our guest, Dirk Friel, from being the co founder of Training Peaks and many other training tools that so many of us athletes use. So, Dirk, welcome to the Inside Sports Nutrition Podcast.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been a while, so I appreciate it, and looking forward to the chat. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thank
Awesome.
you.
I wanted to ask you a question before we dive into many other questions because
Yeah.
we're recording this in the morning hours and we're all in Colorado, same time zone and everything. But I was just curious, like if you had breakfast or something
Uh,
to eat today, what all did you load up with, if anything?
yeah, I mean, my go-to right now is really like a high-fat Aussie like yogurt.
Oh, okay.
And I can't stand low-fat yogurt. Like I need like the all natural, like give me everything. So and the fat helps, kind of maintain, I guess, levels, if you will, through the morning. So just some big crash, but add a little granola to it, some nuts, and literally like blueberries, like the
Yum.
quintessential Boulder kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
breakfast, if you will. If I'm doing, if I do a bigger day, I'm going to go into like training within the next couple hours, and it'll be a lengthy training. I'll add some toast and almond butter to it and honey, so kind of start to beef it up. That's kind of the core for me right now.
Nice. Do
And
you
coffee and
accompany that
coffee.
with
I I,
I
I
was gonna
can't leave out
ask, is
coffee.
there a hot beverage in there?
I am like I grind my beans every morning. Even when I
Mhm.
travel, like I'll bring my coffee and my cone and my hot water
Yeah.
pot. And if I don't know what the coffee
Nice.
situation is, I'll cover my bases.
That is full on, man. I love
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
music
I
to
mean,
my
that's
ears.
that's taking preparation because we always teach athletes, hey, you got to be prepared when you travel. That's literally
Oh,
taking preparation to the next level.
It
Oh,
is.
yeah. Well, I can bring you back way back in time. But when I was a junior racing, like 15, 16, 17, traveling in hotels, I just had an electric wok.
Oh.
I, I could boil water. I could do
Yes.
pasta, rice, stir
Oh,
fry. I could even do pancakes in it. It was like
Yeah.
this kind of flat, kind of big
Yeah.
wok, and it was lightweight actually because it was thin, like it fit right in my travel bag. I could pack clothes all around it, and I got really
Yeah.
good at cooking in the wok when I was a teenager on
That's
the road.
actually impressive and not so much because I'm gonna share a little story real quick before we roll. But very impressive that you actually did that as a teenager because we don't. I work with a lot of teenage athletes, and that's just not
Oh,
in the wheelhouse, right? It's just like it seems like that's just gone. Those skills are gone.
we were self-supporting back then. I mean,
Oh yes, yes,
the teenagers now are flying places. I would drive to northern Quebec, Canada from Boulder. I would
yeah,
drive to New
wow.
York and like race nationals and drive to Super Week. And
yeah.
so it was literally living out of the car. I'm sure kids still do it, but yeah, you kind of
Totally,
had to make do.
absolutely, absolutely, and we sometimes do, right?
Yeah.
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 So this
Fun
is
times.
Dirk. I just want to say, like we've known each other for many many moons, and I do have to say, my introduction into the Friel name was through your father, right? So
Mhm.
I'm an endurance coach, and I just remember, I went to CSU, Fort Collins, so did Dina, and but I just remember like Joe, your father's story and the running company. Like it was, I want to tell you, just this is a total aside. As an endurance coach, your father and your family has had just so much positive impact both on my career and I think just the career of so many in professionals and athletes and coaches. So one, thank you for that. Two, though, I think that's why I said, oh, that's not that impressive with you traveling with your walk because it was almost like because I know your dad. I'm like, yeah, I would almost like that would be almost like an expectation in the Friel family. I don't know if it was or not, but right.
Yeah, yeah, no, no. Thank you. First of all, thanks so much. It was definitely like in our DNA to be endurance athletes, and
Totally.
that's from the probably late '70s is really when it kind of all started.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was anything. It, all resources it took to just kind of get to the next best race, and
Totally.
whatever it took, that's what I would do, or they would help me do. And so I definitely owe them a whole great deal. And this whole generation, if you will, of he started something and I kind of took it from him, and
Yeah,
kind of almost like just took it to the next level, if you will.
totally.
So yeah, I definitely very, very blessed and cherished to have had the right parents in terms of
Yeah.
living the endurance lifestyle.
For sure, for sure. Well, can we kind of step back into that? So you're pretty known for your cycling background, but can you just take us on the journey of Dirk Friel as an athlete? Like, did you
Yeah.
start as a cyclist, and kind of take us through, college and early life, and kind of where, kind of ending at where we're at now? Like, what's up? What are you up to now in terms of activities?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my father was kind of always a coach. He
Yep.
actually was a head football coach, assistant track coach in Northern Colorado for high school. And then one day he decided in like 1980 to leave coaching and teaching high school and buy a running shoe store. Like,
Yeah.
so he literally bought a business called Foot of the Rockies in Fort Collins, Colorado. All of a sudden now the family business was a running shoe store. My parents, were getting into running, and they did the Boston Marathon, and we would travel to all kinds of races. And my mom did Boston and New York City, et cetera. But then around the early 80s, so I was starting to kind of just do cross country in middle school,
Okay.
and then triathlon started to become a thing, and my parents were dabbling in triathlon. So I started to go and do triathlon early 80s. It was just picking up. But then the bike, I just immediately just fell in love with the cycling portion. I may have done a super short little kids triathlon, right? But I just love cycling, and I would come home after school and just do laps in the neighborhood. We had like a 1 mile lap around the neighborhood, and I'd be like, I did 18 laps yesterday. I'm going to try 20 laps today. And
Nice.
but my parents still wanted me to do school sports. So in middle school, I was doing football, basketball, track. But then on the side, I was also cycling and racing. And so I begged them when I got to high school, can I just do the bike? So starting high school, I only just focused on cycling. Luckily, here in Colorado, we had the Coors Classic.
Mm-hmm.
So I could come down in the mid 80s and see Greg LeMond and Bernardino and, Phil Southern, I can't remember all the names now, just like these big stars, they're international cycling stars, were racing the same roads that I trained on. And so I just like fell in love with it even more. We had great group rides and an amazing racing calendar in Northern Colorado, and all the mountain towns had stage races, Copper Mountain and Steamboat and Crested Butte and Telluride, and just the list goes on. We went from one stage race to the next, in the 80s, and really got to hone my skills with a great, kind of generation of cyclists in the 80s into the 90s. And I loved racing in the wind, Northern Colorado, Fort Collins. We got really good at echelons and fighting in the wind and in the gutter. And so I just kind of fell in love with that idea of the classics, the Northern classics in Belgium and Holland. And so I read everything there was about racing in Europe. And then, I fast forward to, I guess, high school. I was a resident at the Olympic Training Center with like Bobby Julich and George Hincapie and Van de Velde and, that whole kind of crew and generation. So there was just like amazing talent going on. So I obviously never made it to the World Championships as a junior, but I'd make like the final 20 cut, if you will,
Yeah.
And, but finally I decided to drop out of school. I did 1 year of college, dropped out, told my parents I'm moving to Belgium. I got a one-way ticket.
Wow.
I did 5 seasons over in Europe. So I did 2 seasons amateur and then turned pro and stayed there. And so then I guess end of 1994 season, that was my 5th season in Belgium. And I came back to the States and got a pro contract back here. And I just went back to school. I went to CSU, and
Okay. Yeah. Go Rams.
I know exactly. I did one semester a year, and
Okay.
I would race every other month of the year, and I would still race. I would do the fall semesters. I would still kind of race somewhat into the fall, but that's how I got through school, and I would do it all over again the same. And when I went to school, literally in school with me at CSU, training, racing, and other students were Jim Miller, who, is
Oh, I know Jim. Yeah.
chief of athletics at USA
Yep.
Cycling. And we had Inigo Samion, who's Dr. Inigo Samion now.
Yep.
It's Chris Baldwin, and we had like amazing athletes back then that became kind of pillars in the sport of cycling. And Inigo now coaches the Tour de France winner, Tadej Pogacar. He's the head of high performance at Team UAE. I mentioned Jim Miller. So there was a lot going on in Fort Collins in the 1990s. So that kind of brought me through a racing career, a pro career. I raced pro for 12 years, retired in 2002. We started a family, and that was the plan. So I kind of took a hiatus a little bit away from real competitive sports, but continued to train cycling. But I always had this burning desire to kind of get back into skiing because I didn't ski for so many years through cycling, but I did ski as a kid, and I loved doing it. And all of a sudden I discovered this sport called Skimo, or ski mountaineering, and it's got all kinds of names associated with it, randonnée and alpine touring, whatever. But it was that blend of endurance, athletics, and crazy fun downhill, like downhill mountain biking, but you're on skis. And it's now a sport, and it's going to be in the Olympics coming up in Italy. And so there's a really vibrant, scene in Colorado. There's now a morning race series at Eldora, which is like 30 minutes away from us.
Right.
And quite a few races around the state. So I really do 6 months of ski mountaineering. And it's just big long days, skiing, just like on the bike. And then I kind of turn on a dime and I do 6 months of mountain biking / gravel racing.
Nice.
And they really they do. And as I get older, they do complement each other. Cycling kind of makes me weak. It's so isolated. Not very, it's not, weight bearing.
Right.
I've done it for so many decades. I'm sure my bones aren't in great shape. So getting in the skiing and some running and getting that in kind of rounds me out, makes me stronger, a little more well-rounded athlete. And as I get older, I think that is beneficial, and they definitely complement each other. So I'm definitely kind of in the heart of my season now of Skimo racing.
So can you break that down a little bit? Because I feel like some of our listeners are going to be like, skiing and mountaineering, like what is it?
Exactly. And it's not cross-country skiing, and it is not telemark skiing.
Okay.
So the technology has come such a long ways that I now have carbon boots. Each boot weighs 1 pound.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
It's all about the uphill, basically. So you have super light carbon boots that you can go into walk mode. So you have a full range of motion for uphill, but you can lock them in really quick, and they're very rigid for downhill performance. My skis are super short and skinny, much shorter than a cross country ski, but they're carved. Or shaped. So you can carve. And we have skins, and literally you have mohair skins that are sticky on one side and mohair on the other. So they stick to the bottom of your ski. You can gain traction and grip for the uphill. So you're literally running uphill. You rip the skin, lock in your heel, lock the boot, and you just bomb it straight downhill.
Oh my gosh.
You do laps, or you go from point to point. So my big race each year is called the Power of Four in Aspen. And you have to summit all 4 mountains in Aspen: Snowmass, Buttermilk, Aspen Highlands, and Ajax.
Yep.
It's 25 miles and 12,000 vertical feet. and it takes me right around 6.5 hours. I've taken like
Okay.
90 minutes off my time from when I first did it. So it's somewhat up there, getting closer to like an Ironman, definitely more than a full, or
Yeah.
definitely more than a half Ironman kind
Yeah.
of volume or distance time wise. So nutrition obviously plays a big part
Huge.
in
Yeah.
racing and training. So I've kind of learned tips and, tricks that work for me. So that is the sport of ski mountaineering. And it's basically the original sport.
Yeah.
It is literally how mail was delivered to Breckenridge, Colorado.
Right.
I was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming last week, and the mail was delivered to Jackson Hole from Victor, Idaho via skis, and a mailman with the mail on his backpack, and he had skins on the bottom of his skis, and that's how he delivered mail to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And
Wow.
it wasn't a sport; it was like a necessity back then, and we've turned it into a sport. So it's great. Yeah, I love it.
Are you thinking, because I've never done this before, but it's so fascinating, and I've known athletes too who do it. Do you think the tendency of the athlete to do Skimo is kind of like that cross-country skier, triathlete, cyclist, like more of that high endurance based kind of getting into Skimo? Or what do you see in terms of who's out there with you? What type of athletes?
There's a lot of trail runners. A big icon in the sport of trail running is, Kilian Jornet.
Yeah.
So in my book, Kilian is basically the best endurance athlete like alive right now.
Right.
He's set the record. He set the record twice in 1 week on Mount Everest, like no oxygen, base camp to top and down. He holds UTMB record. He holds, Hard Rock 100 record, but he's also a winter athlete, and he does a lot of, he's been a past world champion Skimo athlete. So, it's a low impact sport, but very high aerobic conditioning at high altitudes, which can then transfer very well into trail running. Imagine coming out of a winter of doing high altitude Skimo, and then your legs are fresh and ready to go to pound on the trails. So there's a lot of trail runners getting into Skimo, some cyclists, but I find cyclists tend to cycle year round.
Totally.
So there certainly are, there is some cyclists coming into it. And then there's pure winter sports. That is their absolute number one focus for the entire year is Skimo. And there's an athlete, John Gaston, who got second in Leadville 100 mountain bike race to Keegan Swenson. So he's, pro, absolute world-class pro level. And he is our fastest Skimo athlete, in America. He's right up there. So he does international, Skimo races, but he can also duke it out on the mountain bike with the pros. So it's pretty cool.
That's impressive for sure. Right. So this is interesting to me, Dirk. So about half the year you're Skimo, half the year you're cycling. And, I'm just going to kind of bring in Training Peaks real quick, because you're a father, you're an athlete, you're a business person, you're co-founder of Training Peaks. And for the listeners, if you don't know what Training Peaks is, we'll put that full description in the link in the show notes, because it's such a great online software training tool for athletes, coaches, you name it. But this is my question, like, how do you find the time to go up on the mountain, like for hours, or go out for hours and, be a great dad and be a great businessman leading Training Peaks? Like, how do you balance that?
I owe a lot to my location of where I live. Literally, we have Eldora, a small mountain 30 minutes up the road, and I love going Thursday afternoons, and it's quiet, getting there at like 2:00 and ski to 4:30, 2.5 hour ski. We can go early mornings. I've done many many mornings, 5:30 a.m. with the headlamp on, going up in the dark, getting a few hours in, get back at, my daughter's out of the house now, so we're empty nesters. So that,
oh my gosh, congrats
helped a lot. Well, thanks. I mean, last winter was my first winter as a empty nester. So certainly my training volume went up because of that, no doubt. I definitely had a lot of, evenings, where you're sacrificed, right? You're gonna, I want to have breakfast with my daughter. She goes off to high school. I want to see her, in the evening. So I'm going to try and fit in training around that and work. So it's definitely evolved. That's the benefit of getting older, I guess.
Yep.
It's sad to drop them off at college and walk away, but it's
Yeah.
also like my training expanded more.
Totally, right? It's like that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pros and
And
cons.
I've kind of designed my life around it, obviously, as well, if you can't tell my location. But I get up to the high country a lot, and I have a place up in the mountains that I can get away to. And so I spend maybe 20% of my time up in the mountains.
Nice.
So yeah.
That's awesome.
That's
Wow.
great. I wonder, Dirk, just with the work you do, and I know you're involved in other companies too, other software tools and a number of features, benefits for athletes, tools, but is there anything you can talk to in terms of current projects going on with Training Peaks or any of the other tools that maybe the listeners might benefit from, or keep their eyes open? And even if it's nutrition related integrations or anything like that, be fun to hear.
Yeah. A lot of people don't know we have a sister company that we own called Train Heroic. So almost every triathlete, cyclist does some form of strength training, and a lot of coaches prescribe strength training. So Train Heroic is the same as Training Peaks, but Train Heroic is focused on strength and conditioning. So that's kind of a cool project we've been working on for a good number of years. So go check that out if you do strength training. We have a lot of coaches that use both Training Peaks and Train Heroic. Within Training Peaks, we've recently launched a feature called Stack Up, and we launched that first for cyclists, so you can see how you compare against other cyclists of your same gender and age group. But how do I compare my 5-minute peak power, my 20-minute, my 60-minute? So what percentile are you? And that's comparing you against other cyclists in our database.
Okay.
In the past, it was kind of like theoretical. This is how you, kind of stack up on a world-class level, but very few people are at a world-class level. So this is really cool, really kind of nifty to see, what percentile am I for, my 20-minute peak power, and can I eke out a few more watts next year and move up to the next, maybe 80 percentile or whatever it might be. Then we pulled that into running. So running pace. So you can compare yourself against your age group for different distances, durations of running. So, what percentile are you compared to our database? And we're going to roll out many, many more kind of stack up filters, if you will, that will kind of like help you, I guess, assess where you're at, where you need to improve as it relates to your event. You can't be, the 99 percentile across the board. No athlete is 99 percentile in all durations of peak power or running pace. Right. So what's important for you? Where do you need to improve? How do you compare against the competition? And then how can we lead you down a path towards making those improvements? Ideally with a coach, expert instruction. So I see that developing a lot more. We've kind of just launched that in the last couple months. On the nutrition side, we've got more and more third-party apps that are integrating with us in terms of our API integrations. We have, apps like Super Sapiens that will pull, or Fuel In is another one, where they pull our past and future workout data from your calendar, your Training Peaks calendar, and pulls it into their app, so they can overlay your completed workout data or your planned future workouts to help give you meaningful insights into how to fuel, whether that is to recover or to prepare for tomorrow or whatever, race is coming up. So we're not going to take on all the nuances of everything nutrition within Training Peaks. I think it's great to partner with other experts. we've, oh gosh, for probably 15 years now, have been partners with MyFitnessPal. So you can link your Training Peaks to MyFitnessPal app. Your macro nutrient breakdown ends up in Training Peaks. But if you then want to look at your micro nutrition, details, you're going to go over to MyFitnessPal for that.
Yeah.
So I see a lot more integrations with partners as we go down the road. So that's kind of that's what we're kind of doing on the nutrition side right now.
That makes sense.
It's interesting, really quick, because you caught something on, it caught my attention, Dirk. So you said these integrations, and this is the way I took it. So I'm an athlete, maybe I'm a triathlete, let's just say, right? And this weekend I've got my, I'm an age grouper and I've got my quote unquote stack. Most age groupers do a training stack on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, big days, depending on the time of the year. So are you saying that there is a possibility in the future for Training Peaks to help guide these athletes? So if I've got a 4-hour bike ride and a short run off on Saturday and maybe a 2-hour run on Sunday, like, is this what you're talking about? Like there will be some nutrition and recommendations or guidance based on Training Peaks seeing that training coming in the future and saying, hey, you might want to prepare, or here are some recommendations. Is that what you were saying?
I'd say that's happening today, but it's not contained within Training Peaks.
Gotcha.
So there are other apps out there that you can work with that will pull in this weekend's training.
Right.
And it will then give you the advice of how to fuel, pre-fuel, during workout fuel, and post recovery.
Yeah.
So there are apps doing that today. We have Tour de France teams doing that today. Jumbo is a Tour de France team, and they have an app called Food Coach. So they pull completed workout data as well as future training and racing data. So they can see, what's your needs in terms of recovery after today's training, but also how to be thinking forward. And it's giving then the advice to the athlete of what to eat. And even when they're at home, when they're on the road, they can work with the team coach, dietitian, at the team hotel, at the race, whatever. But this then helps them when they go back home to help recover and fuel properly. So that's definitely happening today with several different apps.
Do you use, now I'm curious into the Dirk story, right?
Yeah.
Do you use any of those things for your training to kind of help guide your
I feel
nutrition?
I'm like not to the level where I need to really calorie count. I kind of want to stay away a bit from that, if you will.
Right.
Probably most athletes don't really need to have the exact numbers, but the right formula, if you will, for them. They need to find the right formula that works for them. Everyone's so individual. So no, I'm not doing all that. I think maybe earlier in life when I was pro or I was really shooting for the podium at a really high level, and certainly during different times of the year, that might be of great benefit.
Yeah.
That's an interesting one. So can you kind of like, how has your nutrition evolved from being a junior cyclist, right? And now Skimo, and obviously we're all older. Like, what did you used to do back in the days for your nutrition? If you can share that.
Yeah. It's funny. I think back, first thing I think of is living in Belgium and northern France. And we would literally we would eat like horse meat. Like it was like old school. Like the night before the race, you'd get some horse meat sometimes, and
oh my gosh,
and then like a whole lot of spaghetti, so we ate a lot of spaghetti and a lot of red meat, and I think now, and I even see it, with the Tour de France teams and triathletes and elite athletes we work with now. So much more emphasis, obviously, on vegetables. Bringing in a lot more. Fruits and vegetables into the overall diet, which we didn't have enough emphasis on, decades ago. So that's been a great evolution. I think it helps keep the person overall healthier and can sustain a career longer as well.
Yeah.
So I think also, again, decades ago, I think back to like what we ate during the race. I definitely had more real food, if you will, which was good and bad. I think for long race, we we were doing classics that were over 6 hours long, in cold rain. So early in the race, it was kind of okay to take in, you'd literally have like a cheese sandwich,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they'd have these biscuits, et cetera, that had a good amount of fat in them.
Yeah.
But then later in the race, we would switch over to like there was this product called Dextro Energy, and it was just like
I
these
remember
tablets.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember like late in the races switching over to just like pure sugar tablets.
Wow.
Yeah.
But now, I definitely don't do as much of the real food. I don't know if that's a bad thing, but I personally have found like I don't, I guess I'll name some brands of like what I use, but I
Yeah.
really do like the Morton,
Uh-huh.
hydrogels and the Never Second gels.
Yeah.
There's something about them that has been improved over the original kind of gels that I used to use, and not as much
Yeah.
of a gut bomb. And they do seem to somehow get through my gut faster.
Mhm.
So I definitely have a routine of what I try and stick to,
Mm.
on race day. But it's definitely evolved, like I say, like my time in Belgium was so different. When we ate so many pastries,
Yeah.
literally our soigneur would go each morning to the pastry shop and buy these pastries that were so delicious, but I'm sure that they're just packed with butter and
Right.
high fat, so it kind of
Yeah.
slowed down the emptying of the gut.
Right.
So it may not have been the best thing, but oh man, they tasted so good.
Oh, I bet. I
I
bet.
think we know the secret now, Bob, to Dirk's, athletic achievements. It's horse meat,
Horse meat and
Yeah,
Belgian
pasta.
pastries,
no more.
spaghetti.
Yeah, I think about lean meat, fruits, and vegetables
Yeah.
is kind of what I think about now. I think my
Yeah.
meat consumption has gone down, but I'm certainly not like all, plant
Mhm.
Yeah.
based. I'm proud to say, I eat meat, but I think
Yeah.
the amount has come down. But yeah, bringing up the micronutrient count within, plants has definitely been more of a focus as I age. And
Did
less processed food, is really the
Oh,
main
yeah.
thing. If you can cut
Yeah.
Mhm.
that out, it kind of helps everything out.
Mhm. Did you do any sort of physiological testing, Dirk, over the years? Like when you were racing pro or getting into Skimo, did you delve into the world of testing or do a lot of blood testing? Are you doing that kind of
Hmm.
stuff currently just to help guide, your fueling and some of those things around your training and competitions?
Well, in terms of testing, certainly I used to do a lot of lactate threshold, VO2
Mhm.
max type lab tests to
Mhm.
help set zones or track progress. I haven't done one for maybe 8 years now.
Mm.
Mhm.
But definitely I used to do a lot of those in terms of tracking zones and improvement of intensity levels. Um, Also, I used to do, I guess, a lot more blood tests, back when I was pro and racing elite. And back then it was more, we really kind of focused on tracking iron, and
Yeah.
iron binding
Yeah.
capacity. And I definitely knew iron is a fat soluble substance. So you certainly don't want to overdose on iron. That can become toxic. So, you know, don't take iron unless you know you need it.
Yeah.
But right now, I haven't taken a supplement in over 15 years. I just, I have like no need. I have no evidence that I need to take
Yeah.
Mhm.
a vitamin, every day,
Mhm.
or iron every day, or whatever it might be. It's just not coming through in my, complete blood, chemistry tests working with my doctor. I'm not feeling anything wrong per se. So I just kind of stay away from that. I just try and stick to the real foods and nutrient dense foods.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I just kind of do the annual, blood test now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And knock on wood, like haven't needed to do more.
And are you, because I think we're all about the same age. So
Yeah.
as, we are still thriving in our master's years, but is there anything that has caught your eye from a nutritional angle that you're keeping in mind, like for the longevity piece or supporting our aging processes, or it's kind of same like lean protein, lots of produce, and keeping up with your exercise and all your
Yeah.
other well-being?
I, you know, I, in a way, it's kind of funny, but I've cut out a lot of the starches. I've cut out a lot of rice. I used to eat a lot of bread. I used to eat a lot of pasta. And that used to be kind of the focal point of almost every meal, right? And cereal, rice, pasta, bread, which is like such a high percentage of my overall calorie count,
Yeah.
which is by far not what I do now. I think I time the starches
Yeah.
because they do not have a lot of micronutrients, a lot of great benefit other than energy, right?
Mm.
And if I overconsume those starches, it just leads to, becoming heavier and fatter. So I time the starches really around, they certainly ramp up leading into a big race period, as well as recovery. I feel it. I adhere to like recovery windows, and kind of my rule of thumb, which came from my father, was however long your workout or race, that's the window of prime recovery. So if, I do my 5-hour training, I feel like, okay, I can afford to take in a lot more starches, carbs via starch in that next 5 hours. Okay. But I kind of leave that recovery window. I'm back to lean meat, fruits, and vegetables. If I trained an hour today, I need like no recovery fuel at all. Like literally, if I did 1 hour, no problem. I can replenish my muscle glycogen, my liver, with just my lean meat, fruits, and vegetables. So it's when I start thinking about 90 minutes or more, that's a really hard workout. If it's 90 minutes of mellow, again, I don't really need to focus on it. But if it's a really hard 90 minutes or more, then I start to like think, okay, good recovery routine right now in terms of nutrition, ramping up the starches might be good right now. So I guess that's one thing I've developed over time. Whereas when I was younger, that was 100% all the time. When I was, and yeah, training 28-hour weeks at high intensity and doing 2 or 3 races a week in Belgium, that's what it took, but it also may have sacrificed some health benefits as well.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that starch and kind of the periodization of starch as you've gotten older too, because I've noticed that too, right? And you touched on something that kind of hit with me where, at a certain age, and I don't want to play the age card, but I'm going to play it anyway. At a certain age, and of course, Dina, I'm only speaking of males here because Dirk brought this up, so I'm just going to jump in. But I find the same thing. Like if I eat too many starches, I feel heavy, I feel bloated, I feel just different than I did about 20 or 30 years ago when I was training, right? And it's amazing. I mean, we all know aging just wreaks havoc sometimes on our body, sometimes good, but sometimes not so good. But it's interesting you said that, because I think a lot of our listeners, including, myself, we are going through the same thing. And Dina, I don't know if you want to share the female side of that, but I do find that I have to do the same exact thing you do, Dirk, and be very methodical with my starch intake, not necessarily fruits and veggies, but more so on the starch side of things. Dee, what do you got?
Yeah,
Anything from the
definitely.
female perspective?
I think it is to the point, like specificity, just like we have to give more attention to our training regimen, right, as we age, to mitigate some of the age-related changes or other physiological changes with respect to hormonal shifting. Similarly with nutrition, is being a little bit more specific, or for some of us, a lot more specific, depending on health history and risk for disease states and so forth too.
I think if you go off the rails, it affects you more, right?
Oh,
So
totally.
the extra alcohol affects the sleep, or the overeating at night affects the sleep. And then and the next day you may not have the energy to do the planned workout. Whereas, when you're younger, you just like bounce back and no problem. And you can go out the next morning and hit it hard.
Exactly.
Certainly not the case, as we get older. So, and I figured out more my own kind of personal secrets within my race day nutrition, the pre-race meal, the, on the course nutrition, kind of my program. I never really thought about that when I was 25 years old
Yeah,
racing,
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So when you are on the mountain, just to hit on that, when you're on the mountain and let's say, over 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, how are you consuming? Because I know a lot of our listeners are like, how is he consuming calories? A lot of people look at cyclists, they're like, how do you take your hands off the bars? And, mountain biking is a little different than gravel or road, but how do you do it with Skimo? Like, how do you
Yeah.
plan during either training or racing nutrition and hydration? Like, how are you scheduling that? What are the logistics
Yeah.
behind that?
Yeah. I mean, in general, I'm kind of targeting, above 75 grams an hour of carb.
Okay.
I'd love to try and get closer to 100,
Okay.
and we're talking like my race pace for like a 6.5 hour race. I mean, this is just me. I know my numbers. I'm like 152 heart rate is what I
Yep.
average. My threshold is like 167 or so. If I were to do a 1 hour all out effort, it'd be like 167, 168. But my 6.5 hour race intensity is like 152. I don't have a power meter, so I'm kind of going off RPE and
Right.
heart rate. And I'm occasionally checking in on the heart rate to make sure I'm not at like 160, which occasionally does happen. I got to pull myself back. But if I can stay at the 152, we do have transitions, so like triathlon.
Okay.
Obviously, from going uphill to downhill, you have a transition, and from going downhill to uphill, you have a transition. And sometimes we have boot packs where you take your skis off and you put them on your backpack, so you have a transition.
Okay.
So I have in my A priority race, I have 10 transitions. So if all I did was take one gel at every transition, I would get in 10 gels in 6.5 hours. But I'm targeting a little more than that,
Yeah.
12,
Right.
14 gels. But that's only, if I did 2 gels an hour, that's 50 grams an hour, but my target is closer to 100. So in my bottle, the Hydra flask, those nice, soft, like ultimate direction flasks, or,
Yep.
I've got 50 grams of carbs per flask. I'll start with 2 flasks. So that gets me to my first aid station at hour 2. And at that point, I have to switch from my own personal brand that I choose to whatever's on course. So yeah, just like triathlon, you have to you can't just stick to what because on race day, you're not always going to be given that exact fuel choice. So luckily I can handle that. But I do tend to go more towards a pure water in my flask the second half of the race, so that I can adjust, how does my stomach feel? Do I feel like is it hotter than I expected, taking in more fuel, or I can handle more, nutrition? So kind of the second half of the race, I rely more on gels and less on the nutrition in my actual water. But the first couple hours of the race is all my, nutrition's coming through both, through the gels as well as in my flask.
And you're keeping those flasks close to your core to keep them.
So we have inside pockets inside, we can unzip, and we have multiple pockets inside of our race suits. So it's staying close to the body, doesn't freeze. And then I have an easily accessible pocket in my backpack, which is just a Velcro pocket. So I can quickly open that up and grab a flask that's back there. And because it's behind me, it's not getting the wind chill directly.
Right.
So they tend to not freeze. Definitely, I don't use any hose at all. Like any hose is going.
Yeah, I don't think you can. Yeah, totally.
I learned that early on.
Yeah.
I can't do a camelback with a hose. You can on a warmer race. So I guess I'm targeting, 75 to 100 grams an hour.
Yeah.
And I know the better I fuel the first half, the better I'm going to race the second half. And I had a couple bad years where I didn't fuel well and I had the nausea, and I know I lost 45 minutes in the last 2 hours of the race.
Wow.
But I've had good years where I've made up, 30 minutes on folks ahead of me. So it's hard to hold back. It's literally the balance between nutrition and pacing.
Yeah,
It's the
totally.
same It's
Yeah.
the same in marathon, it's the same in Ironman,
Mhm.
it's pacing, nutrition.
Yeah.
And that's where cycling is actually unique in a way. Like you could be full anaerobic from the start gun in a 4-hour race, in a
Yeah.
mountain bike race.
Yeah.
You're full throttle racing for the single track. And that's a hard sport to get right,
It
in mountain
is.
biking. So the more individual kind, pacing sports, Skimo,
Right.
Ironman, you can definitely hone it in, but you got to be
Yeah.
disciplined.
How many ounces of fluid do you target per hour, or do you have
I'm
a
doing more
range?
like probably at least 500 milliliters,
Okay.
is really kind of what I'm doing.
Okay.
Hot days more, but I'd love to do
Right.
a flask an hour with 50
Yeah.
grams
What is
of
this is,
carbs.
you just got me. What is a hot day of racing
Yeah,
on
I was
Skimo?
thinking the same.
I've had a hot,
Like
my
20, 30?
hottest, my hottest power of 4, at the finish line in Aspen is like 55 degrees.
Oh,
Oh,
okay. So
wow.
that's definitely warm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the final climb in that race is a 3,000-foot climb. So it's going to take me an hour 45 to do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's high noon because we start at
Yeah.
6
Mm.
a.m.
Yep.
and I'm on this climb at high noon, and you are baking. You have no hat,
Oh,
no gloves. You're
wow.
fully unzipped and
Yeah.
you're just sweating.
Wow.
That's kind of unique and rare, but I've definitely had races like that skiing.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
the springtime snow that's nice and mushy,
Oh, yeah.
Oh gosh.
Amazing. I love what you said, Dirk, like some of that focus on front loading to a
Yeah,
degree, like
right.
fueling hydration in case, yeah, we get behind later. It helps mitigate some of that. So it makes sense. And I think that pertains to so many sports. Like you said, we can control our intensity and pacing and that nutrition plan
Yeah,
to a degree.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's the competition a lot of times that dictates. So you can't
Mhm.
always go into a race just planning your exact pace. If you're
Mhm.
racing for the podium, you got to go with the competition
True.
in
Yep. Yep.
any age group now. Like
Yeah.
Totally.
every age group is so competitive now. I'm speaking of like Ironman and half. So the more you're racing for the podium, the higher the risk you're taking on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so it's like full throttle. It's going to work, or it's not going to work.
No. And athletes have to prepare that. I mean, let's
Yeah.
take it back to nutrition. They have to prepare for that nutritionally. And just, I mean, you mentioned even just going anaerobic with the mountain bike racing full
Right.
on. Like if you don't practice that in training, you're gonna blow up
Yeah.
on race day.
Yeah. And experience comes into play when you have to realize, oh, this is the moment. And that's what I learned in, professional cycling. Like this is the
Mm,
moment to get it in. I don't have many of these. I got to get it in now. And like, you do everything you can to kind of get it in for the next surge.
Yeah.
for sure.
Or the spot on the course where you can take it easy and ride no-handed and kind of like grab a gel out of your pack or whatever it may be. So that experience of knowing when and realizing that this is the moment, you got to jump on it. And that experience goes a long ways.
Totally.
For sure. Oh, wow. This has been so cool, Dirk, to hear more about your athletic endeavors and the, kind of the not juxtaposition. I don't think that's the right word, but the Skimo world versus your cycling, some of those differences and just more about what you've been up to. Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
that. Has there been anything that you've thought of that you'd like to additionally throw into our conversation?
I think like another thing that I've kind of learned is to train the gut, in training. So
Yeah.
definitely never really did that with a focus. Ideally I would do that once a week, on a long training session where I adhere to, like, it's sort of like nutrition comes first. Like I know I can do the
Yeah.
hours, but
Yeah.
let's get the nutrition in
Mm.
and just kind of like train the gut and see how it goes. And yeah, so that starts 10 weeks out. It's
Yeah.
not the week before the race,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
so
Really?
I
It's
guess
not?
that's another thing.
Wait
Yeah.
a minute.
No, that's a really good message, because I think a lot of athletes do they implode a little bit, and
Yeah.
they lead, I mean, let's give everyone props. I mean, doing any type of sporting event and competition, there's a lot of moving parts. I don't care what sport it is, right? And sometimes nutrition isn't a high priority. And that's what we're trying to send the message is that, hey, let's make that a higher priority than you thought in the past, at least. So I like the 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, like whatever, start with my thing, nutrition periodization. Like, make sure you periodize your nutrition to support your training. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is as you're building and getting some higher intensity or longer volume, like let's start getting the nutrition that you think is going to work, or maybe you want to experiment with early on, because I think we've all been through those little mishaps, and you're like, well, you come back from a session, you're like, that didn't work today. So, not that you have to go back to the drawing board, but you just have to tweak some things.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really powerful message.
Yeah.
I save all my packages too, like within the
Okay.
training session, and then I come back and I empty my pockets.
Yes,
So
yes.
because I can't always remember during training, but then I'm like, I count like the gels, and I record how many scoops I put in my bottles.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
And I'll record that, and that kind of was a little bit the last check-in of like,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't do as many as I planned,
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Or I
No,
did.
that's good. That is
Yeah.
a great message for the athletes, is because a lot of times, it depends on where you train, but you'll stop at a watering hole or whatever bathroom, and you'll throw away your trash, or, I mean, that's a good thing to kind of keep it in your jersey or your pockets or your pack or whatever, because you do want to have that. It's kind of like that post-workout assimilation of what happened, right? What
Mhm.
did I do? Because I mean,
Exactly.
geez, even like a few hours you're out there, you're like, what did I eat? How much did I
Right.
drink again? Right.
I know. How many gels did I throw away at that gas
Exactly.
station? Was it
Yeah.
4 or
Exactly.
6? Yeah.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, Dirk, I have to say that I thought I knew a lot more about you than I did, but I
Yeah.
learned so much just about like
So
your
true.
history and your past, which is so cool. And that's why we love talking to people and athletes and, successful business people and fathers and parents like you. But what a cool history. I mean,
Yeah.
so I'm just saying thank you from the bottom of our hearts, right? We want our listeners to experience a little bit more behind Dirk. So we're gonna end with some high five questions, if you don't mind, and we just ask a series of 5 questions that are kind of a little more, I don't say personal, but just kind of off the whim, off the beaten path, if you will. So is that okay to ask them?
Yes, no problem.
All right, Dina, you want me to start?
Yeah.
All right. So first question: what is a sporting adventure on your bucket list? Not a race or competition, but like an adventure, if you have one.
Yeah, definitely bucket list is to get to Norway. I want to ski the fjords in Norway, possibly by boat. Stay on a sailboat or a boat, go up the fjords and ski to from the boat. That's definitely like a little bit of a dream I want to get to. I checked off another adventure 2 years ago during COVID and got up to Valdez, Alaska.
Oh, nice.
It went touring up on Thompson Pass up
That's
there.
right.
So I love kind of getting the high mountains that are far away from Colorado and experiencing different mountain ranges.
Love it.
So
Love
hardcore. It's awesome.
It's fun. It's a vacation.
Yeah.
That's great. Question number 2, Dirk, what is your wind down routine to end your day?
Well, I thought you said wine.
Oh, well, maybe it is part
If
of
that's
the
part
wine.
of it.
Particular wine of choice, I go to like a Sauvignon for my wind down of the day. I love a deep oak so that's my answer. Like a deep Sauvignon, definitely.
I love it, Dina. We're gonna have to remember that question for the future.
Cabernet. No, sorry, Sauvignon is more of a Cabernet. Sorry, wrong varietal. Cabernet.
Got it.
Awesome, love it. Okay, number 3. What is your go-to, your primary favorite, whatever post ski meal? Not like a recovery snack or anything, but like a meal. What's the best one for you after skiing that you enjoy?
Well, I guess the one that gets my mouth watering and that I would love is like a pizza.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like I earned it. That's like my kind of I earned it meal.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
You're probably burning a ton of calories, by the way. Yeah.
Geez.
Yeah. So I don't do a lot of pizza, but that would be like after my race meal would be. They have it at the finish line, in fact. So.
Okay. Nice.
All right. Well, question number 4, Dirk, and I know we live near each other. So I think, well, I'll ask the question, even though I'm just curious about this one, since I think I've seen you in my local canyon a few times. But in Colorado, what is a favorite cycling route? And maybe that's an off-road route and a road route if you're doing much road riding.
Yeah. I'm gonna a go-to, one of my favorites certainly has to be the Gold Hill. It's
Mm.
a gravel ride,
Mhm.
connecting, to the Switzerland Trail, a
Yeah,
little more rocky, hardcore, going up through Wall Street. It's Old Town Wall Street, up 4 Mile Canyon to Switzerland Trail to Gold Hill,
nice.
down Sunshine Canyon. Some classic route like that on dirt is certainly one of my favorites.
Great.
Nice. Love it. Okay, so this last question, this one's going to take a little bit, and it's the most difficult one, so we save it for
Mm.
last. If you only had one single piece of advice to give to all athletes, only one piece, all athletes, what would that be?
Go slow to go fast.
Oh,
Too
interesting.
many,
Yeah.
way too many athletes have way too much intensity in their training program,
Yeah.
and they need to focus the intensity and have a lot more easier days
Yeah.
to build that aerobic kind of conditioning, building the mitochondria, building the ability to burn the lactate efficiently, the fat oxidation. That stuff takes a lot of disciplined time, and you have to have a true governor on the effort and hold back,
Mhm.
and the ego takes over. So
So difficult. Yeah.
ignore your ego and go slow.
I love
Nice.
that. And it's tough for time crunched athletes, isn't it? It's like, okay, I've got an
Oh,
hour here and they just want to bang it out. Right. But,
yeah.
a lot of times I try to educate the same message, like, you know what, depending on the training cycle and what you're trying to do and your age and your sport, yeah, like back it up a little bit. So I love that last piece of advice.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
intensity means you plateau early. So, do 3 days of intensity this week, do that for the next 5 weeks and tell yourself that's as good as I'm going to get. Is that
Yep.
your goal? No,
Yep.
that's not your
Yep.
goal. So you
Exactly.
got to back it off and time the intensity.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Love that message. All
So
right.
Yeah.
good. Well, Dirk, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning.
Yeah.
And we'll be sure to put links to you and the companies that you're involved in the show notes for everyone. Check that out. We so appreciate your time today. And gosh, so much more to keep our eyes on with
Yeah.
Dirk Friel. So thank you so much on behalf of Bob and myself and all the listeners out there. We appreciate you, and we will sign off for today.
And
Yeah. Thanks,
remember,
guys.
listeners.
That was
Oh,
fun.
thank you, Dirk. We appreciate it. Listeners, remember, eat to train.
Oh, yeah, and nourish to thrive.
Nice.